So today we're going to talk about IP-based public announcements and paging. There's a operational difference between paging and public announcements, but technology-wise, it is the same. The idea of a paging system is that I try to find somebody somewhere, I don't know exactly where they are, like Dr. Schmidt, please report to the operations room. While public address is about reaching a lot of people in a public space, for example, in a museum, to tell them that the exhibit's open in the West Wing. On my picture here, there is one of the first PA systems from the 1920s. It's a Magnavox. The architecture is still the same. There is an input device, in this case, a microphone. There is some amplification and distribution device, and then there are speakers. Now, while the actual application is very old, technology has come a long way. I'm opening this presentation with this device on the right side. You see this yellowish tower. It is a product by a company called USSI in the US. It's called Hyperspikes. This single tower that you see there can cover 12 square miles of area with very crisp and clear announcements. Now, I had the pleasure to actually get a demo of this. It's very impressive. You just need one speaker, and their patented technology delivers very clear voice into a very wide distance. Why I'm proud about it is because Barix technology is inside their product, some of the technology that we will be covering in this presentation. So the analog world, a paging and announcement system in the analog world consists of input devices like a microphone that you can see here, maybe some line in for some background music, a bunch of speakers with adjacent amplifiers on audio cables, and then there is a core, which is the mixer amplifier. This really is the brain of the system. Now, moving to IP, it doesn't look so much different. However, the core in this case is just a simple Ethernet switch, and the intelligence now needs to be somewhere else. So we're going to have input devices, microphones, as well as modern input devices going onto Ethernet. We have output devices, which are speakers, being connected via Ethernet. And we can also have amplifiers with speakers that are connected to the same system. Optionally, I can have intelligence in the system in the base of a server. So some device that actually runs the whole system and decides where things go. Different technologies are available to put an IP-based paging system. And in the next few slides, I would like to have a quick look at some of the technologies and the benefits or the disadvantage of them. I think it's key to mention that Barix actually can play all these technologies more or less deep, but this is not like an exclusive, this is all crap and only one solution is the right one. So let's talk about the first technology, which is SIP. It's basically using VoIP technology, telephony system technology, to address different speakers, different areas. The advantage of this solution, it integrates really well with the telephone system, so you can page from any telephone. The other advantage is if you put a SIP trunk, you can actually get around the world with it very simply by just having telephone numbers. So it easily goes over network segments. A few of the disadvantages, it has a server, and the server is always a single point of failure. Well, I have to be honest, SIP has backup technologies where you can have multiple SIP servers to overcome some of that. One of the big disadvantages is that the configuration of the SIP server is really not that straightforward for a multi-receiver setup. SIP is made for a point-to-point intercom solution, which by the way is another advantage. I'm getting intercom with this, but it's really hard to configure for some zone or group paging solution. That is one of the disadvantages. There are solutions to that, and we'll talk about InformaCast and Revolution a bit later, software packages that use the SIP layer to address this. One of the key reasons why SIP is not always the solution of choice is that a telephone system like a Cisco Unified Call Manager, for example, asks for licensing fees for individual connected devices. Now, no guarantees that these prices here are up to date. It's stuff I found on the internet, but I've seen many projects that did not go SIP because the customer said the fact that he has to connect 100 speakers to the SIP system and pay license for each of them is making it very expensive. Barix can support SIP solutions. As you will see later, we have SIP clients implemented. And when the requirements are for many destinations or intercom requirements, we recommend SIP a lot. So SIP is one possible technology, but it has its disadvantages. Let's look at another possible technology. Dante. Dante has been introduced a few years ago. It is a proprietary technology running on standard IP networks. The benefit, it's a multi-vendor environment, so many boxes can speak Dante. Barix can connect to a Dante network using our AES67 interface mode. Advantages of Dante: it has very high quality audio and it has very low delay. The disadvantage, the network design is critical. There is a controlled number of hubs, controlled form of traffic. If you go and read some of the installation guidance of some of the manufacturers in that space, you will realize that most of the time people end up actually making an IP network infrastructure for the audio only and not packing this onto the standard IP network that they use for anything else that people use on a data network. It uses high bandwidth per audio stream. It is expensive because there's licenses and wide area bridging with it. Well, it is possible, but it's actually not really simple to do. There are Dante solutions on the market. I've just taken one example. There's a few. Porsche has a solution for medium to large installation. Just looking at the boxes in this display, you realize the price segment of a solution like this. The advantages of the Dante solution is the synchronization of the playout. So it is really good if, for example, you have a conference room like we see on the pictures here. Everyone has a speaker in front of them and all the speakers should be synchronized and you want minimum delay. Dante has found its way into a lot of AV installations, in event rooms, in theaters, and that's where you will find it, and then it can be extended. Disadvantages of Dante, I already mentioned high bandwidth demand. It uses about 6 megabits per second for a bundle of 4 channels. If you compare that to a SIP-based announcement system that uses somewhere between 64 to 192 kilobits per second per audio channel, you start to realize why you're concerned about what else is running on the network. One of the big disadvantages of Dante, it doesn't run on Wi-Fi, so that could be a limiting factor for some implementations. And you need some kind of server solution that actually does some dynamic allocation, like zone selection in a Dante system, and somebody has to provide that, which usually is also a costly solution. Let's talk about technology choice number 3, which is our ICPaging solution. It's based on the Barix BARP protocol, which is a paging protocol invented by Barix to address multiple devices in a network without the need for a server. So the advantage of this is I don't have to spend the money on the server. I don't have a single point of failure. I can build a paging system, can even be extended into an intercom system. It truly runs on standard IP networks. And if I say standard, I mean the ones you run your email, your chat, your Netflix, whatever you run on. It's easy to support zones and groups. It has low bandwidth utilization. You can select the audio quality by selecting the codec. And it combines easily with other solutions, such as Informacast, SIP, and background music. We'll have a look at this a bit later. And as I mentioned in the beginning, no server needed. However, when I want to run into multiple network segments, it is a bit more complicated than, for example, doing this with SIP. Now, Barix actually has more than one serverless PA solution. One we call simple paging, one we call ICPaging. There is differences in the numbers of zones and in some of the features it can support. I think the key message is, if you conclude that a paging solution on a standard data network could be an interesting solution, contact pre-sales at Barix, and we guide you to which solution is the right one. So how do you select between the choices? Well, first question is, do you need milliseconds delay? Do you have a microphone in a room, like a conference room, and a loudspeaker just next to it? Then having some delay might be not acceptable, and you might want to go into something like a Dante. So if there's a conferencing system adjusted to it. How many zones and endpoints do you need? There's limitations with many of the solutions, and you've just seen ours. That also might decide whether you go for SIP or whether you go for a ICPaging solution. Do you want to use the shared IP infrastructure? That is very important, and in many cases when Barix sells paging solution, it is actually the deal maker. Schools are a wonderful example. In many areas of the world, the governments have invested in the IT infrastructure in schools, and now they want to revamp their paging solution. And it's actually very cost effective to just connect it to that standard data network that the students use and that the classrooms connect to, and where all the data and email is running on. Well, and sometimes you don't have to select. You can actually install it all. You might have corporate paging using SIP or a mass notification solution, and then you have a local paging solution that uses ICPaging. So, does it fit everywhere? No, you have to watch out for one thing. Do you have to comply with evacuation directives? As you've seen on like my second slide, one of the applications of paging or public announcement, to be particular, is emergency notifications. Now, there are standards. There is a standard for emergency communication system in Europe, the EN 5416, which basically designs how emergency alarm systems need to be built, and they certify them and they define functionality. So there needs to be surveillance that the system actually has a connection to the loudspeaker. That needs to be verified all the time. A lot of requirements that, for example, a paging solution by Barix ICPaging does not actually fulfill. So these can be lockout criteria. NFPA 72, Chapter 24 is just another one, more in the North American space, but there are a few of those. Now, I mentioned you could have all these technologies in one place, and I give you an example that is actually a real-world example that I have seen. And this is a cruise ship, and the cruise ship, as all these cruise ships, has an entertainment theater where they put musical performances and stuff. And an audio system in that entertainment center is Dante based. However, on that exact same cruise ship, they've selected Barix IP audio with background music for general announcements into all the ships, restaurants, walkways, and so on, because the infrastructure was there and the installation was much cheaper. Last but not least, they needed to get a certified emergency PA system. It has much less points of loudspeaker points. It doesn't have the same music quality requirements that a background music system has, but it needs to comply with safety standards. So at the end of the day, you have 3 of them on one installation. Another good example I have here, we've actually installed quite a few, or our partner has installed quite a few IP audio system on river ships. And they actually also had to install 2 systems. They installed an analog emergency alarm system for evacuation and fire alarm, but then they installed an IP-based system for the tour guide that tells people what they can see, as well as for background music, where they wanted good audio quality and a lot of points of distribution to have good audio quality to all the passengers. So the message here is these technologies are not exclusive. These technologies all have a different purpose, and you might need multiple of those. And I mentioned that emergency intercom might be a lockout, but it does not need to be. There could be emergency installation where the requirements are not as stringent as EN 5416. For example, we have installed a few years back in an emergency intercom solution and paging solution in a resort on the Maldive Islands, or our partners has installed that. So it doesn't exclude the solution from emergency notifications. It's a question of what standards apply. But it's something you have to consider when you decide to which solution to propose. So I've spent some time on the intercom, on the paging solution and the public announcement solution technologies available. Now I would like to jump and talk a little bit about the components that go in such system. Paging input devices, I've started my presentation with one from the 1920s. Beginning of this millennium, we've seen typical talk stations. What you see on the picture here is our now obsolete PS16. A captain might have a microphone with a button that we've had devices to support that. We call an UNSICOM. Or we have these still available and very much liked PS1 that has a 2-button intercom device with paging capabilities with a microphone and a speaker. As the telephone system moved to IP, requirements came up for telephony inputs into paging. So using a SIP phone and call a page system. We've sold many SIP gateways into this application. There are limitations when you want to do zone-based paging. Barix has made solution for that too. Solution we call hybrid SIP and analog paging, where with dialing zones, you can select a bunch of zones. But the reality is the market has moved on, and today your standard communication device is your mobile phone. And there is high demand for how can I use my mobile phone to enter my page or my public announcement into the system. And we'll look at that in the presentation. And to give you an outlook, something Barix doesn't have a solution at the moment, and we're not sure we ever have one because it's kind of a very locked-in industry, but very clearly we already see that, for example, the integration of Teams or Skype for Business into paging solution is the next step that's probably going to happen in many customers. So we're talking about input devices into a paging or public announcement system. What Barix offers today is a variety of devices. We have the Annunzicom PS Touch, our latest desktop talk station with sound selection, with a microphone and a talk button, a very robust metal case, solid talk station that's very much liked, for example, in the director's office or in a school. As the central point of doing announcements. We have the Annunzicom PS1, which our small paging device with just 1 or 2 buttons. We do have a family of Annunzicoms that allow to connect a microphone and loudspeakers and then build them into some device, whether that's the captain's microphone or some emergency box, as I've put it here. That device can be the input device for paging. And last but not least, we have introduced earlier this year the Paging Gateway M400. Well, it's second last actually of the ways to input, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. The last one to mention here is a Java software that we provide for free that allows you to build a Java user interface you can run on a PC and use that as an input device to paging or announcements. So let's talk a little bit about how to get to this new trend, the new technologies. I'm seeing a lot of customers that approach us and say, we are very interested in paging from the mobile. And until very recently, we sold them a SIP gateway and at least they could do a page to all. However, growing that into a zone-based page system has its limitations. So what we have done is using the latest web technologies, we've actually come up with a brand new device, which is the Paging Gateway M400, that provides a web page, and every modern browser has the ability to enter audio, feed it through this device to its analog output, and make announcements that way. So I can use my phone on the local Wi-Fi network. Multiple users can do that. I will not cannot do an announcement if somebody else does one. The announcement will be decoded and played out on the analog output of this device. By just adding this box, I can upgrade an old analog system to have a telephone front end at very little money. So that's a great advantage of the Paging Gateway M400 and not using SIP technology. By the way, oh, okay, something went wrong here. The user interface at the moment looks like the one in the back there. We are revamping the user interface of that to make it look much more modern. So the idea is really that on my phone or on my PC or on my tablet, I have a front end to page into the system. But now the beauty about the Paging Gateway M400. The Paging Gateway M400 does not only have the analog output to feed an existing paging, but as I grow, I can easily grow this by implementing ICPaging endpoints. So today I have an analog paging system to everybody. In the future, I want to do zones. I can add an IP-based device as a zone, and the Paging Gateway allows me from the user interface to select which zone to page to. So it always goes to the analog output, but then I can do zone selected paging if I select zones in it. Many of the devices connect on PoE, so I can have a speaker somewhere where my paging doesn't reach, connected to IP, and easily expand what I've done as a first step with the Paging Gateway M400. So the opportunity is to add all this at the customer after the initial implementation of a mobile front end to the existing paging solution using the paging gateway N400. So much in this presentation about input devices. Let's spend a bit of time on the output devices, the paging endpoints. Now, everybody knows a paging endpoint is a speaker, and Barix actually does not sell speakers. So we actually don't sell paging endpoints. You need to source the speakers. You need to source amplifiers with speakers. We don't do that. Now, there's many reasons we don't do that. One of them is that we think it's more cost effective to use the speaker that you prefer. A beautiful example I experienced at one customer. They were looking at a background music and paging system into a restaurant. And he told me, yeah, the speakers are Bose. I said, okay. He said, yeah, they're set. And said, so we're feeding a Bose amplifier, then we need a device that has line output. And he said, no, we're not. The customer doesn't want the Bose amplifier. I said, okay, I don't understand. And he explained to me that at the end of the day, the Bose speaker in the restaurant is an image statement. They don't care so much about the audio. They care that it looks like, you know, great brand. And we retrofitted Bose speakers with our IP former device to make them IP speakers. So talking IP former, I'm going ahead here, talking about our paging endpoints, or what we understand of paging endpoints. These are devices that either feed speakers or feed amplifiers with speakers. The Xstreamer M400 IP audio decoder can be a paging or an intercom, and a paging or a public announcement endpoint with a line out, feeding an amplifier that then maybe is running on 100 volt, 70 volt to a bunch of speakers. If we want to connect a speaker directly, the PoE-based endpoints, the IP former TPA 400, delivers 8 watts into 4 ohms, so I can nicely feed one ceiling speaker with it. By the way, the IP former is also certified for as plenum rated, which means it can be used in the ceilings in the US. They have a special standard. Only equipment that's plenum rated can go there. The Xstreamer MPA 400 is basically the same thing, but with much more power, with 40 watt outputs. And it is running on this high power PoE standard, 4 PPoE, or can have a power supply, and feeds a horn speaker or maybe multiple ceiling speakers at once. So how do we use them? Let's look at an example. So here we have an office building, 4 stories, some washrooms, kitchen corners, and so on. 6 zones, 4 floor offices, 1 common area, 1 garage. So at the attendance desk, we put a PS Touch. We connect it to the standard IP network, and at the manager, for the manager's phone, we put a paging gateway N400, so he can page from there. On floor 1 to 4 each, we put an Xstreamer N400, feeding a low-cost amplifier, 100 volt output with a bunch of speakers. The difference between IP speakers and 100 volt technology is still so big that when it comes to money, many times people prefer to still put an amplifier with 100 volt or 70 volt technology, but that amplifier doesn't need to be fancy anymore. It can really be a simple amplifier, and we're feeding it with an IP-based front end. And then in the garage, we put 4 horn speakers, each being powered by an Xstreamer MPA 400, and that's how we cover the whole area. Now we're left with the washrooms and the kitchen corner, where we just need 1 speaker each, and we put an IP former TPA there. All this is connected to the standard network, and I don't need a server. I don't need anything else. I'm ready with paging and public announcement in this building. So I said we connected all and it's running. Next topic we'll discuss a bit is the routing. So how does it work with the zones and so on? I've stolen a few layout diagrams from the internet from manufacturers of analog paging systems. And it doesn't matter to which one you go. In the analog world, there is always one core component, which is this complex DSP router, MUX amplifier unit that distributes the microphone signals to selected zones with selected protocols. Now, in the IP world, I don't need that anymore. In the core is a switch, and the decision what should be played, I can actually put to the receiving device. And if I say a receiving device, I mean the IP decoder device, one of the few I've introduced to you. So what it means is that the decoder device doesn't just receive a stream and replaces the audio cable. It is an intelligent device that receives lots of streams and via configuration is able to decide which one it should actually bring to the loudspeaker. So I don't need the server, I don't need this anymore, and I can support at the same time background music. And then if somebody makes a local live paging, it automatically tunes out background music and feeds through the paging. But if a fire alarm announcement comes into the system, then it also overrides the local announcement and it will make the fire alarm. If corporate wants to call in on SIP, I can put that at some priority, and then maybe that goes in between the fire alarm and the local paging. All this intelligence is in the end device. And that is a very important point. An IP speaker is not just an IP speaker. The question what that speaker can do is very important for the future, for the expansion of an IP-based paging network. Our devices that you've seen on the receiving side all run the same firmware. We call it IP audio client, and it is the most powerful IP audio decoder on the market. It supports everything, all of the things I mentioned. It supports streaming for background music. It supports SIP, so it can register with the telephone system. It supports these mass notification systems that are on corporate level allowed to do much more elaborate mass and group notification to many different technologies, such as single wires InformaCast or Intrado's Revolution. It supports Barix ICPaging. And all of this at once. What I'm actually doing is I'm selecting the priorities of these, and then the device by itself decides, I got a SIP call, that's more important than my local announcement. I'm overriding this and I'm going to put the SIP call through. So again, why is it important? It's important because we can support multiple devices and you can grow the system. You might start with a simple public announcement system, but you might later on add some fire alarm messages that should go on to the audio announcement system too. If this is not part of the certified core, many people still like to actually use the wide distribution of the audio signal that the paging solution provides to extend fire alarms. It means that if in the future I decide that Revolution or InformaCast is something I want to add, we can add it supported in the system. So I no longer have a technology limitation if I pick the right decoding devices. So let's do another example, a very small one here. So we have, for example, some store, some warehouse store, we have office, and we have some workspace or shop space. And I would like to have a PA and announcement system in here. Basically, in the office, I want to have a talk station. I would like to have the ability to page via mobile. And in the warehouse, I would like to have its own zone for the announcement. So I'm ending up with 3 zones and a talk station. If I want to implement that, it is very simple. I put an IP format to each of the speakers. I use my standard data network on which all my data and everything else runs. I connect an ANSI-Com PS Touch, install a paging gateway, and I'm done. And most of the time, I'm done at the lowest possible cost to implement a paging system or a public announcement system into a client. Now, when you look at this, you realize, oh, okay, he's putting a lot of IP formers. I'll have to configure each of them. There might be a lot of configuration effort. It's actually very simple. What we have done is we've researched what's the best way to configure multiple devices if we put in a larger installation. And we learned a few things. One of the things that's not liked is if you have to bring a configuration laptop with a configuration software. It always gets forgotten, or it doesn't work, or it's not updated, or whatever. So basically what we've come up with is we have all the devices to talk to each other, and each device, and it doesn't matter which one, you can select, and from there you can configure all the devices, either by basically copy pasting stuff or by manually configuring, for example, things like zip credentials in that user interface. And the beauty about it is there is no master device. There are some solutions out there where you have to like assign a master device and then the rest is slaves. Every device is the master. So if one dies, I still have the other device and I can configure the complete system from there. So it's worthwhile looking at this. It's something that you only encounter when you start actually configuring a system, but it's very straightforward once you've used that. It runs on each of the receiving devices and allows me to configure all the receiving devices from that page. Now, paging and public announcement is usually only one thing people want to do. There's a bunch of more requirements that people have. One of them is background music. The quality of our system is good enough or is good for background music. So why not put background music in there? And there is different ways to do that. If you have an analog source or you subscribe to a background music service provider that gives you a box which has an analog output, a Barix in-streamer ICE is the perfect product to get that into the network. But you can do it more direct. Each of the receiving devices can receive internet radio and play that on the speaker if you have a stream that you want to play directly. So background music is supported on our ICPaging solution. Another topic that people come to us is actually scheduler. So people would like to have a scheduler, whether this is for scheduled announcements of shop closing or school bells or anything like that. People would like to record some messages and then just tell the solution when to play it. When we look at scheduling, we differentiate 2 applications. One we call local, which basically is my single point shop, my hairdresser who says we're closing at 5. So we would like to make an announcement at 10 to 5 that we are closing in 10 minutes and please leave the building. The other scheduler requirement is one that's a multi-site cloud managed requirement. These are chains of stores that say, well, we have 30 shops and we would like to put the schedules for each of these shops. We have 30 schools. We would like to do centrally managed scheduling. For both of those, we have solutions. For the local scheduler, we have a simply weekly scheduler already built into the firmware of the decoding devices. So it's nothing you have to pay for. You can go in and you can configure this, upload your announcement files, and configure it from there on a weekly schedule. For the cloud managed advanced scheduler, we're using a product that we call Retail Player. So it's a bit weird talking about something that's called Retail Player if actually I'm trying to solve announcements in a school. But that's actually exactly what Retail Player is. It is a audio playing device that I can manage via the cloud from remote. And it has a new feature, which is an IP-based forwarding. So it can play an announcements into the network, going to the endpoints that receive it and play it out. So for both applications, for local as well as for cloud managed, we do have solutions. Well, there's more requirements. Manually triggered messages is one. Well, there's two sides to this. One is that a fire alarm or whatever kind of evacuation alarm, you would like to pre-record when the pulse is calm and then just have a button to play it. But there's also other stuff you would like to play spontaneously, like a birthday song in a restaurant when you bring out the birthday cake, or some messages like, please somebody go to cash register 5. Our PS Touch has one recorded message you can trigger. Our paging gateway supports 9 recorded messages. If you use the Retail Player, you can centrally manage recorded messages that can be played out from a mobile interface. So again, for manually triggered messages, we have a multitude of solutions and can address that. Now I'm starting to see that I'm taking but too much time, so let me round it up here. The last input solution I talked about is ICGraph. ICGraph, as I said, is a bit older technology. It's a Java-based app, but it's free and it's really quite powerful. I'll give you an example. One of our system integration partners put a paging and control solution into these buses you see on the picture here. And he wanted to have some pre-recorded messages. He wanted to be able to make some announcements. Plus, he even wanted to be able to open and close doors. So what we've done is we actually put in ICPaging solution together with a customized ICGraph user interface. So in the last carriage, he runs an industrial PC that shows this interface here, and the conductor can select where he wants to talk to. A completely different example of the ICGraph system is a paging and background music system for a ski resort that we've done here in Switzerland. So we can do very nice, very low cost solutions for that. So summary. Do you have IP infrastructure in place and want to use it for public announcements and paging, maybe even Wi-Fi? We have solutions that are made for that. Do you want paging from mobile phone with zone selection? Do you have an analog infrastructure in place that could be upgraded? Paging Gateway M400 is a good way in. How many zones do you need to support? That might actually be a lockout or drive the technology used. If it's too many, maybe SIP is the right approach. If it's only one-to-one, then definitely SIP. If it's under 96, ICPaging can do it off the shelf. Do you have amplifiers and speaker in place or evaluated? If you go with Barix, you need that. And it also drives the decoder selection. Which of those products are you going to use? And it's part of the system design. So we're not providing speakers. You have to source them according to your or your client's wishes. Do you have mass notification solutions in place, such as Intrado Revolution or Single Wire Informacast? We can integrate with it. Do you have others? Let us know. We might be able to integrate with it too. And last but not least, do you need background music? Need scheduling, local or via cloud? Again, we have the solution. Does cost matter? Of course, we are in a very good position many times. When our solution fits, we're always very competitive in price. So how do you get a system design with Barix? Well, first of all, collect the requirements. Second, select your speakers and amps. Decide how you're going to do the end part, the audio part. And then contact us and tell us what you're trying to achieve. And then we gladly assist you with what we think is the best products that you should use for your application. And our pre-sales team is very strong at this. They have over 12 years experience in this market, and they know a lot more. Just to give you an example, we also have solutions to bridge from one network to the other in a routed environment. And I'm not going into details here, but we have it and we can consult you. But we need to know your requirements. At the end of the day, Barix paging can go anywhere. I tried to show you the solution choices. I tried to show you the benefits of each of the solution. Many solutions, or in all the solutions, we have more or less elements to that solution. And we've installed paging everywhere, in retail, transportation, Sao Paulo Metro, New Jersey Transit, in factories where we integrated it with SCADA systems. We install in lots of schools. We have fire station in Minneapolis. We have zoos. The one I'm aware of is Chicago Zoo that has an elaborate system where they can even play zone-based background music for weddings and things like that. The real power is that the IP network that's available can be used for a paging and public announcement system. And that is very simple to do with a Barix paging solution. Now, I did a lot of talk, 45 minutes, lots of information. I hope it was useful to you. If you've forgotten most of it already, there is one thing I really want you to take away from this presentation, and that is the Paging Gateway M400. I'm absolutely convinced that there's thousands of schools and government buildings and offices out there that have an analog paging system and that are really interested in leveraging this into a mobile paging solution. So using their mobile to page into it. With the Paging Gateway M400, they can get there at the lowest point of cost. And the beauty about it is they open the door for IP-based expansion as they move on. So it's truly upgradable and it's truly future-proof. So thank you very much. This was my presentation on paging and public announcements. Feel free to write to us, and I'm wondering now what questions came in. I'll hand back to Patrick.